Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Financial Industry Group seminar. Welcome back to those of you who've joined us previously, and also a warm welcome for those who are joining us for the first time. My name is Steve Davidson, and I chair the local financial industry group, FIG Norwich, as it's better known. And today we're delighted to work in partnership again with both Larking Gowen and with UEA to bring you this presentation today. I should open by saying that the period since March 2020 has been very challenging for all organisations in Norwich and Norfolk and in the UK generally. We thought that this would be a good time to organise a seminar to explore what is essentially the changing workplace, and also to get some ideas on management and the engagement of remote workers, and also any ideas on recruiting and retaining talent in these difficult circumstances. The format today is going to be a panel discussion, but before introducing the panel, I've got a couple of quick admin points, if that's possible. There will be a Q&A session later, and so please do feel free to ask any questions you may have, or indeed if you would like to share any experiences that you have from your own organisation. I suggest you do so in the questions box, which I think should be on the right-hand side provided, and we'll aim to wrap up by about 11:15 at the very latest, depending on how many questions are there. First of all, I'm the individual panelists for today's discussion are Lexi Haywood, Becky Ames from Larking Gowen, and Dr. Helen Fitzhugh from Norwich Business School at UEA. First, let me introduce Lexi. Okay, Lexi joined Larking Gowen in late 2019, and she's training to be an ACA in their corporate audit team. I think that's great because Lexi will have had experience from prior to COVID and post-COVID and currently. So it's great to have you to join us today, Lexi. Also, can I move next to Becky Ames? Becky joined Larking Gowen in 1997. She became a partner in 2015. Becky particularly works with owner-managed businesses, and she helps the clients comply with their accounts and tax compliance matters. Becky advises on all aspects of business and focuses on the businesses that she's responsible for achieving some growth. So Becky can give you some perspective from a business leader's point of view. Next slide. Last but not least, I'll introduce you to Dr. Helen Fitzhugh. Helen is a knowledge exchange fellow for the Propel Hub at Norwich Business School at UEA. And again, we'll provide the details of the hub later on, I guess. Helen also is a senior research associate in the wellbeing team, and she's carried out a lot of research in the public sector, the private sector, and also with third sectors on how to operate more effectively in this new environment. Helen will be very useful to us on this discussion because she's got some research-based evidence, etc., and we'll be able to talk to you a little bit about that. So if we move on, thanks very much, incidentally, to the panel for agreeing to join us today. So this is a first for us to be able to do this, and it's very kind of you to put up with me asking you some questions. Anyway, let's kick off the panel discussion now. So the first question is to Lexi. Lexi, as I said earlier on, I think you joined just before the first lockdown. So you've got experience of starting life in the office, so to speak, having to move to remote working, and if that's not enough of a challenge, having to pass your exams as well remotely. So
yes,
you've seen what work life
that was fun.
You've seen what work life might have been like, and then faced the changes and challenges since then. So how has if you can maybe put into your words, how has the last 18 months or so been in the life of a trainee and for you personally?
Definitely a whirlwind. I think that's pretty much a case of definitely emphasis of being flexible. So when I first joined, it was mainly office based, but I work in the audit team. So we were pretty much out at clients every week. I very rarely made it to my desk. And if I wasn't out at clients, I was out at study in the classroom. And then March 2020, we got the text from our managing partner, do not come into the office. Fortunately, LG had been like, please bring and take all your laptops home with you every day. And so it was a case of from that then on, I was working from home all day, every day. And our study went remotely as well. So I was working from Microsoft Teams during the day, and then when it was study, it was via Zoom instead of Microsoft Teams. So I got the hang of using various online platforms, but no, it was challenging and just focusing for 7.5 hours a day, on a computer screen was definitely challenging. I think that was the main thing. And then, yeah, and then obviously I was living on my own at that point, and my parents were like, come back, live with us for the pandemic, which most of my study group ended up doing. We all went home to mum and dad.
Yeah, there's some great value in having mum and dad being around at that time. So how did you cover your exams, etc., during that period? I mean, was it easy to do, or what sort of challenges did you have in relation to studying? And for example, do you prefer what it's like now, when you've now got a little bit more freedom?
Yeah, I definitely prefer being in the classroom because making yourself focus for 7.5 hours, like I mean, our tutors were incredible. They gave us more breaks because they appreciated we were in front of the screen all the time. But just learning to focus for that extensive period, and also asking for help. Like, fortunately, I was lucky, our study group, we created like a WhatsApp group so we could send screenshots of questions we were stuck on. But it's just not the same, like studying in the classroom when you can literally put your hand up and be like, help. And our tutors were also, they struggled as well, just engagement, because they relied on the Zoom chat box, which and if you didn't feel comfortable speaking in front of the class, there was always a risk that you wouldn't get your questions answered. But it was definitely a challenge, and yeah, I wouldn't do it again. I definitely prefer doing it in the classroom. Yeah.
Okay, well done, and it sounds like you passed your exam successfully as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well done. So
Thank you
I mean,
very much.
moving on to Becky, and I'm sure you guys in Larkin Gowen must be very proud of Lexi in terms of what she's been able to achieve, and indeed all the other students that are in her cohort. Maybe asking you, trying to bring yourself back to what you felt as a business leader. What did you feel like back in March 2020? And what did you feel about that? What did things look like for you? What did you have to do, and what did you have to secure given that difficult situation? Lexi's touched upon it a little bit, but I guess you had some more sleepless nights at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. Thanks, Steve. It was incredibly stressful and emotional, actually. You feel very responsible for all of these people. We have over 350 employees, many of them training at any time. And as Lexi said, literally, we decided to just tell everyone not to come in on the Monday. And yeah, the systems held up. We were really, we'd invested a lot in our IT over recent years, and really fortunate that worked. And we were prioritised getting the right kit to the people so that they were able to work effectively from home. But that was really only part of it, a very small part of it. It's the people that took the real investment of time and energy and continuously flexing our approach to make sure that we were finding new ways of engaging with them, communicating, making sure that they were okay, basic human stuff, but able to then work effectively. And then after that, as obviously time went on, because at the beginning clearly we didn't know how long this was going to last, making sure we were continuing to develop people, give them the right experiences, and really keep being flexible in our approach, as Lexi said. But yeah, we're incredibly proud of how our trainees adapted, because the challenges for them were twofold in terms of their studies and their work.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Becky. Helen, do you have any observations on that particular period in terms of the research that you've done subsequently?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, listening to Lexi and Becky, there's lots of good stuff there that I recognise from the research we've been doing. You know, in terms of firstly, this idea of there being perhaps different stages, like Becky was talking about. You know, you have your crisis response when things are happening and you have to adapt quickly, but then you still have to morph into how do we maintain this? How do we look after the people long term? How do we develop? And you know, we did a piece of work about how you manage remote workers, which contributed to a checklist, which I think we're going to have the link to that posted in the chat at some point, and it was on the joining page. But what we saw was that, you know, yes, obviously you've got to get the working conditions right in the first instance, but then working relationships and opportunities are really important for making this work in the long term. The other thing, of course, is that people often get so obsessed with the technology, we have to make the technology work, that they don't remember that, you know, people have emotions and aren't just rational, you know, rational machines in front of a machine. And so again, hearing Becky talk about knowing that she had to spend the time on the kind of human factors really chimes with what we saw in good practice in other firms during that time. It was those who really kind of sat back and said, what's going on with our people and how can we help, that then came through it more successfully.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and thinking of the long term and implications are really important. I should say just now that I would encourage people to print off that checklist. It's a very helpful checklist for managing remote workers. And if you once it gets posted, Helen, later on, I would encourage the attendees to look at that. The next question, I think, is to Becky. And so in that, moving on from there a little bit, and life moved on, and you probably have, I mean, even though Lexi joined in 2019 or whatever, you will have had a cohort of new joiners in 2020, some of whom you maybe even never met to onboard them. And so I just wanted to ask you about how Larkin Gowen approached the task of onboarding, well, recruiting and then onboarding people virtually, and how and have you learned any lessons from that in the last year or so?
Yeah, again, very challenging, had to change everything. So we would have normally done our assessment days face to face, obviously interviewed face to face, things like that. So the guys that would have joined in 2020 would have had face to face assessment days, because we tend to do those around January, February time anyway. So I think we squeezed those in. I can't actually remember. But yeah, so when they joined, we were really aware that those guys, particularly if they were joining from A levels or as graduates, would not have had, you know, the end of their A levels or degree wouldn't have been the normal experience they'd expected either. And then they're joining a place of work and how that works. So we were really just thinking on our feet all the time about different ways that we could engage with them. And again, it's one thing making sure they've got all the equipment to do their job well. It's how do you really get them to embrace the culture of the firm and how we do things around here. You know, what does it feel like to work at LG and to be part of a team, and sitting at home in your bedroom when you might have been sitting at home in your bedroom studying for your degree or A levels, and then you have to switch to work and you know your surroundings haven't actually changed, was a real challenge. So it's just constantly thinking of different ways we could do things. As soon as we could get the teams back together in any way, we did. So whether it was forming bubbles to meet outside for lunch breaks when we were allowed to meet as smaller groups, that kind of thing, to really form those relationships and make it okay for people to feel that they can, you know, call someone on Teams to ask for help. When you walk through an office, you guys will all be aware that you can read the room, you can hear lots of conversations going on, you can assess if someone's struggling, that they've not really, you know, sort of, they've been sitting there not doing something for a while, and you can't see that when people are remote. So all those challenges, we've really had to encourage our managers to make sure they're engaging with the teams on a regular basis, and equally make it okay for those guys to feel that they can make a Teams call, ask questions. We've set up virtual offices so that people are on Teams calls together, or Zoom rooms or whatever, so they feel like they're in the environment.
I think that's what we struggled with the most from a trainee's perspective, is that it was more intrusive. Like we felt like we were interrupting, like especially like managers and partners, like phoning them, and like we were asked to update our Microsoft Teams status to say busy or like do not disturb, but it's still like you felt very much more intrusive. You couldn't gauge if, because if you're sat in the office and you have like a little question that would take 30 seconds to resolve, you could sort of gauge when someone's busy, or when you can sort of say, could you just show me how to do this? Like, and it's much harder to, you know, phone someone and you sort of feel like, I'm really sorry, it'll take 2 minutes and then I can hang up. You know, it's definitely it's much easier in the office to gauge that.
Yeah,
And we
in
all know
summer
that
2020 we did, sorry.
sorry.
I was just going to say, in summer 2020 we did a nice piece of research interviewing police officers and staff, and that was the real difference we saw was the old hands, the people who knew their jobs and knew their teams, slipped much more easily into the remote working frame, because they knew if they wanted to ask someone something, they knew how they would react. You know, that person will just go, oh yeah, okay. Whereas if you are totally new to an organization and you've never had an experience of how someone will react to you asking a question, you know, and again, if you're a trainee, maybe you're younger and you haven't had as much experience in the workplace, having that fear build up when you're sitting alone behind a screen and having to actually, you know, not tap someone on the shoulder in a moment and just say, could I just have a moment? And they can go, yes, yes, or no. You know, you have to make that connection. That's a really big thing for people, and doing what you can to facilitate that and put people at ease is a really big part of helping learning and training in the future for anyone who needs it.
I was going to say that upon thinking about this, when I was in my formative years doing my training, believe it or not, I'm a chartered accountant as well, Lexi, so I know where you are coming from. Most of everything I learned was probably learned at the photocopier, or having a cup of coffee somewhere. So how did that virtual way of dealing with it replicate that in some way, in terms of being able to just ask the stupid questions, if you get my drift? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, we were repeatedly emphasizing to the new trainees there is never a stupid question. Like, even if it's just something simple like my email won't work, or like our virtual cabinet won't let me connect, and we were just like, it's all normal problems that you will face when you first start. And it's just like we were assigned buddies, so basically the new starters were given a buddy, and they were the people who you sent the Microsoft Teams message to, and just be like, really silly question, is this normal? And then 9 times out of 10 you could resolve the issue really quickly. So like, and then Becky mentioned that we use the virtual office. So we used it in audit. Like if you were out on an audit, we had a group call. And then what would happen is, if you had a quick question, you would unmute yourself as if to say, tap them on the shoulder and say, can anyone help me with this? And then 9 times out of 10, the rest of the team would, like, someone would hop on and be like, yep, sure, no problem. Here's how you do it. And screen sharing was definitely a lifesaver.
Okay, that sounds as if it was very good. The next question, again, sort of to Becky here, is about we mentioned a little bit about recruitment, but what is your experience of virtual recruitment been? So, i.e., these are the people who probably weren't the people who had an assessment. Maybe you're 21, I guess you're 21 in assessments. How did you do those, and what are there any best practices that you can share with the people who are on the seminar today?
Yeah, of course. So like many people, we found that our use of the technology has advanced so much throughout this, and there's some really positive stuff that we will take forward. So the fact that we can do assessment days virtually means that, for example, I did a virtual assessment day last week, and we had trainees who are based all over the country currently. So formerly graduates would have had to, or soon to be graduates would have had to travel from their uni, for example, to our assessment days. Now they can just attend virtually, and so that whole travel aspect has disappeared to some extent. It's not as easy, but it's different, and I think people have got used to being on camera. They've got used to that environment far more than they ever have, and we're embracing it really, and I think it is going to certainly have a place as we go forward, both with our assessment days, our interviews and things like that, because what the pandemic has shown us obviously is that location is largely irrelevant now anyway. So it is a bit more of an open you know, thing in terms of recruitment generally. So it doesn't matter where people are based broadly. I still think, you know, it comes back to how you form a team, and people do need to have some time together. But the whole recruitment market has opened up. So that brings opportunities and challenges for us as a business. Clearly, because as much as we can now widen our recruitment reach, equally others can also, you know, our people are attractive on a wider basis as well. But yeah, I think it was obviously a challenge. We found different ways. We're continually evolving, but it's really engaging with people. When we did the assessment day last week, the chat that goes on when everyone's back in kind of the central room in between the you know, the things that are arranged throughout the days in terms of the interviews and presentations is really valuable. And people are now far more comfortable with that, is our experience, and they've had to be. So that's the time where we end up discussing, you know, have people got their Christmas trees up? What's your favourite Christmas film? That kind of thing, to just get some chat going and showing what we're about. And the feedback we had was actually, yeah, Larking Gowen feels like a family. It feels like a fun place to be. It wasn't all talking about accountancy. So it's really making sure we get those aspects across
Okay.
in as much as we can.
No, that sounds good. It sounds like Larkin Gowen have you know, yeah, you've had some challenges, but it sounds like your experience over the last year is becoming, maybe you're an exemplar for others to follow. And I mean, that leads me neatly onto the next question, which is that one of the things that a lot of my colleagues on the FIG board and actually everyone I meet, in fact, I was involved in a session on the economic strategy for Norfolk and Suffolk recently. Nearly all the employers and firms are struggling with recruitment and retaining quality staff, you know, just now. Now, one of the things that, Helen, that you might actually want to comment upon is it's clear that some businesses are better at recruitment and retention than others. So what sort of things have come up out of the research that you've done that perhaps the people on the call can consider?
Yeah. So I come from the workplace wellbeing research team at Norwich Business School. So we, you know, from the name, you can probably know what we focus on. But workplace wellbeing, I always want to point out to people, isn't just it isn't a sort of Pilates fruit bowls on the table kind of effort. What we mean by workplace wellbeing is actually something that's incredibly entwined in how a business runs, because it's about the quality of the job offer, you know, the conditions that are available, the quality of the management, the relationships that are formed within the organization, and also, you know, how that organization deals with people if they're struggling with something, whether it's physical, mental health, financial well-being, learning something, you know, and all of those things go to make up the employee's experience of work. So when I'm talking about well-being, I'm talking about in that broadest sense. How do you make sure that the people in your organization have a good experience of work? Yes, then they will hopefully perform better, your organization will run better, you'll reduce absence and that kind of thing. So you'll benefit as an organization, but it's going to be hopefully a win-win for both to have paid that attention to workplace well-being. Now, in terms of retention, that's a fairly straightforward thing. You know, people don't necessarily leave jobs, they leave managers. So if you don't like your manager and you don't think you're being treated well, you know, then you're going to go elsewhere. So if you can sort out your management and make sure that those people are really doing the functions of a good manager, then you're halfway there with the retention, and then the wider experience of work is part of it as well. On the recruitment side, obviously you've only got your reputation to attract people. But people do talk, you know, I've heard people talking about their experiences during the pandemic, just friends and family, and some saying, you know, they really stepped up. They really did make sure that we were okay, and it was a kind of a light bulb moment where I thought this organisation really values me and wants me around. And I was like, we've been treated awfully. They've been secretive. I've had no idea what was going on. I didn't know if I had a secure job. I didn't know if something was going to change in the future. And those are the people who are now part of this, you know, purported great resignation thing that's being reported in the media. You know, people who are considering whether they want to go elsewhere. So I would say workplace wellbeing in its broadest sense is something to consider, and we have a lot of resources on the Propel Hub website about how to improve workplace wellbeing that are all really evidence-based from hundreds of studies, and yeah, lots and lots of interviews with actual business practitioners.
Yeah, that's a really nice plug there for the Propel Hub website, Helen. Well done.
Got to get it in.
Do you have? I mean, you know, you mentioned. I mean, Helen's focusing in on well-being there, but you also mentioned, I think, indirectly, the importance of culture within an organisation. So, both of those things. Is there anything that you feel that from what Helen said there that you've got from a practical perspective, how you can implement that within Larking Gowen?
Yeah, absolutely. So employer brand is so important, isn't it, in attracting and retaining great people. And as with most things, we've accelerated our focus on that because of current circumstances. So it's all about promoting exactly what Helen's talking about. So the employee value proposition, so what it's like to work for the firm, why would I want to be here, and then how you communicate that externally as well to attract other people. Like Helen say, people talk. We want, you know, so we want to make that put that on our website, for example, so that people can see what an experience at LG is like, and you know, all of the good stuff about working for a firm like us. And it really is about getting that message out there. So in terms of retaining people, it's making sure they fully understand exactly what Helen's been saying. So our well-being, our value proposition for them, but also encouraging them to sell that vision to outside the firm, and doing all we can on our social medias, etc., to promote that as well.
Larking were, sorry to interrupt, sorry. Larking were really good throughout the pandemic. We got very regular updates from the senior management about what was going on, what the changes were, and as the government updated their guidance, within hours we had an email saying, this is how LG are going to respond. So we always knew what was going on, like where we were, like what our position was. And they also actually assigned, like focusing on the well-being, each of the managers were assigned a couple of juniors, and every week we got essentially a COVID wellbeing check-in email, or it was a Microsoft Teams call, and they would just literally phone 10 minutes just to check how you were feeling and how you were doing beyond your job. And like, we have our line managers, so we know who to go to if we have any, like, you know, specific stress, but just the general, we were assigned a COVID manager essentially, so they just checked in on well-being just to see how you're doing, how the work setup is, and if you had any like specific queries, you would then start the conversation with them, and then things would be implemented, even if it's just things, my headphones don't work, so they forward you onto IT. It's great.
Yeah, that sounds an excellent idea. And I guess it could probably morph into a more, if you drop the COVID word, it could morph into like being an independent mentor within the firm that isn't your direct manager. So that might be a good thing to pursue as well in the future. Okay, I mean, one comment I would make, Becky, on the branding, I so much prefer the new branding, I must admit, because well, it's not such a mouthful that maybe I'm not allowed to say that. I mean, anyway, it's I much prefer the new branding, and it must make it easier for you to get a culture. It shows you the importance of branding as well. So well done. The next question, I think, to Helen, it's about, I guess, hybrid working, and the fact that looks as though it's pretty much going to be the order of events for companies and firms and organizations. What do you know from the research that you've been doing about the benefits that might give in terms of, I guess, flexible working, but also in terms of the challenges in the sense that you're not always in the office anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose there's two sides to this. So pre-pandemic, there was a lot of research about what was originally called teleworking and then remote working, that built up to say, you know, this is generally a good thing, you know, in terms of people feeling they have more flexibility, autonomy, and you know, job control is a good thing in general. You know, if you feel you can affect your job and do it in the way you want to, then remote working can support that, and also work-life balance. So pre-pandemic, lots about how useful remote working was. But what it didn't do, that research, was it didn't take into account that most of the people who were doing remote working at that time were doing it voluntarily because they wanted to and had requested it. And also that they were doing it part-time usually. So they were remote working some of the day and going into the office. So in that sense, it might have masked some of the potential challenges, because people were already having their office time or their, you know, their workplace time, and they'd chosen it. Whereas what we saw in the pandemic was suddenly lots of people who hadn't chosen it, weren't prepared, their business hadn't, you know, yes, great that you've got your technology sorted, Becky, that sounds brilliant. But lots of organizations hadn't got their technology sorted. So suddenly people being thrown into this position of, I'm working, I'm in complete isolation, my tech is fairly rubbish. Suddenly, actually, you know, this remote working deal isn't so attractive. I'm sitting here with my laptop on a, you know, an ironing board. I've seen people with that. So what we did was we did a piece of research on isolated and confined working. This was drawn on professions who before the pandemic would have worked in that way anyway, isolated from other people or in not being able to move very far. And of course that showed up a lot more challenges, from, you know, very simple things like boredom, you haven't got as much stimulation in the workplace, through to really serious things like sleep challenges, the potential for depression and anxiety, and something that we know that happened in the lockdown originally, the increase of use of alcohol and other substances. You know, so there are potentials for isolated and confined working to cause some pretty serious problems. But luckily we also could see that there were mitigations you could put in place to stop that happening to some extent, because it doesn't happen for everyone. You know, not everyone is going to suddenly drink a bottle of wine because they've been asked to do some remote working. You know, it's a matter of paying attention to the things we were talking about before. So yes, have you set up the physical circumstances right? Have you got the equipment and technology right? Are you managing that work-home boundary in such a way that people don't either feel that work is encroaching too much on their home, or that the home is encroaching too much on their work, depending on their particular challenge? Then also, have you got supportive management with regular contact, ways of being contacted with co-workers so you're not feeling so isolated? And one of the things that Becky and Lexi said that was really important was it's not just about work. You've got, you know, if you were in an office or if you were in a workplace, you'd be able to talk about the Christmas tree, you'd be talking about your pets, you know, so you have to have avenues for doing that as well. And then feeling valued and that you're part of something. If you're sitting out on your own somewhere, you don't necessarily have that collective purpose. Oh, I'm part of this organization and I'm getting on and I'm making a contribution. You're just sending off your work into the ether. And so it's useful for the organization to think about how they can address that and make sure people's work is still recognized as important, and show them how it contributes to a whole. And then finally, this idea, which comes from actually remote nurses in the, you know, like places like the outback of Australia, that they were really good nurses, they were really committed. But if they were out there doing their job in and out every day on their own, then sometimes what happened was they didn't have any chance to do their training, development work, continuous professional development, and things get shoved out the way. Whereas if you were, you know, if you were all in a training hospital in the city, you'd all have your training days every 3 months or something, and you'd go to it. If you were out in that isolated place, how did you attend your training and get that networking and development that you needed? So I know that's a very long answer to your question, but it just shows you that there's very immediate things to think about around physical conditions, all the way through to how do we make sure these people progress long term.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say earlier on, I said that I learned most of what I at the photocopier when I was in my first or second year doing my training. But the other thing I learned a lot from as well was visiting clients' offices. Now, I don't know if you've, Becky and Lexi, have you got any ideas on that? Because it seems to me that the absence of visiting clients' offices is a big gap. And I'm wondering how you are able to fill that gap or try to fill that gap, and whether that's getting better or not. That's probably about 3 or 4 questions, so forgive me, but please feel free to answer.
I mean,
You want to go, Lexi?
yeah, in audit, we are pretty much out of the clients now. We're getting back to normal within obviously COVID restrictions, and it's so much better. It's much easier to explain yourself, and it also reaffirms your knowledge, because you've got to understand completely the goal of, say, for example, the audit test that you're completing. You need to understand it completely, so that when you go ask the client for information and they query or question, you know, why do you need so many invoices, and you have to explain, because I need to complete this test, this many samples. And it's just being able to have those like professional communication skills, which is much harder to do via Teams, via like phone calls. I mean, LG were very clear, when you're speaking to a client, try and have ensure you have your video camera on, so that again the clients don't feel like they're just talking to a faceless icon. It was important for them to see your face. And just simple things like that, which I have noticed the new trainees who came in during COVID, they obviously didn't have that experience, because it is scary, you know, on your first ever audit job. You know, you're walking in brand new, and you know, you're learning on the job, and you have to go ask something from the client, and you've got to, you know, buck up your bootstraps and off you go. It's like, you know, and like, it's getting those skills. I mean, I'm going out to clients now and just like dusting off the cobwebs and like sort of getting those skills back up to scratch as well, you know, that sort of thing.
Becky,
I think sorry, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, Becky, you must have some observations. It must make your life a bit more difficult as well, in terms of having to ultimately sign the accounts, for example. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we soon worked out how to do that digitally, fortunately, so that's okay on my side, clients. But I think, as with all of this, it's also shown us different ways of working, which we will take forward. So virtual meetings, Zoom, etc., mean that we can have more frequent catch-ups with clients over, you know, rather than diarising, you know, an hour, 2-hour meeting. We can have sort of a 15-minute coffee with them virtually and keep up to date with what's going on with them. So that's a real advantage, and everyone's got used to that. That's obviously easier where you already had an existing relationship with the client. So onboarding new clients, whole other thing throughout COVID. So that's been interesting. And certainly getting out to meet them in person has been a priority, because that's when we really understand them, their business, what's going on. Working at clients means you have a far better understanding of what they do and how they do it, as Lexi said. So it is invaluable, but it's not to say that we won't use the tech to you know, that everyone has learned to use now to actually build on those relationships. So again, it's a combination, it's a hybrid, the same as working with our teams and working with our clients.
I guess you must have had some students who actually had never met a client, and maybe, well, I guess they probably have now, but how did you manage to get them over their, I guess, their first night nerves or first day nerves or whatever, in terms of when they had to finally go out to a client?
Actually, I think it's harder to pick up the phone to a client that you've never met than it is to actually walk into a room and be introduced to a client. So I think they had it harder in terms of having to do stuff virtually or over the phone, etc. And I guess that the bit that people can tend to do is hide behind emails, isn't it? We all know that some people do that. So we were very much encouraging, as Lexi said, have your cameras on, talk to the client, arrange that meeting. Broadly, you know, we're always talking to our guys about, it's all about your building relationships with people. So we want you to be face to face with our clients, face to face with the team, and that's such a massive part of what we do. And it's the best way to learn and develop, isn't it? Like you say, the photocopier, the water cooler moments are what's, you know, helped us all develop in our careers, and just listening to others and how they do things. So it's really important, but it's continuously building and encouraging people and letting them have opportunity to do this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm just I should say that I've just had some emails from people who were trying to join the seminar this morning, but they haven't been able to get into the GoTo website meeting. So, I guess they maybe have the same problems as I had earlier on using 100% Apple equipment or whatever. But can I just say to anyone who hasn't been on, I think we are going to try and get a transcript of this or the video available on YouTube by in the next few weeks or whatever, assuming it turns out okay. And so forgive us for that, but thanks for the feedback anyway. I'll probably draw the formal questions to a close now, if that's okay. Any final observations you want to make, Becky, Helen, or Lexi, on that bit? You're probably glad it's all over, right?
No, it's been really interesting. I mean, it's very interesting how Helen's research, draws out what we've been living and breathing. It's really important to understand how individuals have been affected by this and how we're going to work together going forwards in this hybrid, which I think is going to be our norm. I think our biggest challenge is those who are in the office need to remember those who aren't there and make sure they pull them into discussions and things like that. Don't just assume if you're not physically present that you're not, got a view that we need to take into account. So when we were all at home, we knew where we all were in a way. So we knew we had to add everyone into a Teams meeting, but now we're in this different scenario. That's a whole different challenge, and it's a different way of thinking, and I think it's here to stay.
Yeah. Okay, Helen, any final comments from you and Lexi?
Yeah, I suppose my comment is that sometimes I get asked around, how will hybrid working change things? Because it's not just, like you say, everyone at home or everyone in the office. And my sense from all of this, the entire period of change, has been that the means by which you contact people may change depending on where they are, how you do it. The technology may change and you'll have to adapt in that way. But the principles of workplace wellbeing and good management remain the same throughout. So if you're able to have a look at those and learn from those, like I said, about thinking about job quality, thinking about how managers interact with employees, fostering good relationships at work, helping people if they're struggling, those key things are principles for whatever situation you're in. So hopefully that can give a little bit of guidance if you have to approach a new situation, whatever that might be in the next few months, to say, okay, well, we don't have to start completely from scratch. We know what we're trying to do. We've just got to find a way to make that happen.
Those were really good points, Helen. Thank you. Are they all on the checklist that I mentioned earlier? I'll give it another.
If you want me to do another plug, they're all they're all 5 ways to workplace wellbeing, which are on a number of our materials at the Propel Hub, at the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, and I also give regular webinars on 5 ways to workplace wellbeing. So if anyone wants to go through them with me, please do be in contact, because I can point you towards either an existing session or set up a new one for you.
Okay, great. And in the meantime, if I sort of kick off with a couple of questions that I had subsequently, the first one maybe to Helen. In your opinion, is there an ideal remote to face-to-face work ratio? I know that's a difficult question, I think.
I think it's something that people are working at the moment, and I would say, as a researcher, there is always nuance. So, your ideal ratio as an employer or an employee will depend on what you do, and context is all. So in the case of people needing to go out to clients, I'm sure there's a lot more face-to-face work needed in that setting than in my job, where I'm actually most of the time sitting reading quietly to myself. So, that kind of thing is not as necessary. However, I would say that if we think about what work does for people, just in general, we know that work isn't just about getting a wage. Work provides people with social contact, work provides people with meaning in their lives, work provides structure to the day. So if you are going to look at your hybrid working, how do you make sure that there's a reason for them being where they are whenever they are there? So, you know, yes, there's a reason I am in the office or I'm out with a client because it does this. There's a reason why I'm at home when I do this, and not getting into a situation where we've got some of these kind of reactions which are, oh, everyone must be back in the office five days a week. Why, I can do my job at home, and it means I don't have to pay as much childcare, and you're disadvantaging me. You know, you get those conversations coming up. So if you have a rationale, that's probably the ideal rather than any particular ratio.
Yeah, that's a key point. Becky, what's your comment on that particular thing? Because I mean, I guess what it does is it forces you into more easily, well, or more critically define what an individual member of staff's role is, you know, in terms of face-to-face or in terms of being in the office or whatever. So it's a big difference, for example, I guess, between the tax department and the audit department. Yeah.
Yeah, there can be, certainly. I think we haven't given any specific guidance about number of days a week in the office or at home, for example. And some people I know have found that challenging in our firm because they like that, they would like to be told the structure. But what we have said is basically decide where you can do your job best, both for your clients and for your team and your own development. And we all have a responsibility to develop each other. At any time, 25% of our teams are training, so you know they all need our support and they need to be seeing other people and how they do their jobs. But equally, we've got other people, you know, aspiring to management, etc. You can't learn to be a manager or a leader if you're sat at home on your own as easily as, you know, how we would prefer it to be working as part of a team. So it's really considering how best you can do what fulfill your responsibilities, really. And people do tend to form a pattern, don't they? Because we're human beings, and some people really thrive on the structure of that. So some people are set days in each place. Other people, you know, their diaries will determine it. So if I've got a day of Zoom or Teams meetings, for example, where all I would do is go in the office and shut the door and be in a room on my own, that's not effective. So it's really thinking ahead and planning and what's going to be best for what you need to achieve in your role. And as I say, that flexibility is a great advantage for some, and others have not loved it so much, but we think we're getting there, and it's constantly evolving.
Yeah. I mean, there was another question here that I should ask, which I'm very interested in finding out what Helen says on this. It says sometimes we offer well-being resources and remote working resources to help employees, but they don't take them up. How do you get people to help themselves?
This is one that does come up for me quite a lot, because I just said I spend a lot of time sitting quietly reading, which I do, but the other half of my time, the knowledge exchange fellow part, is I'm out speaking to organisations a lot as well, whether that might be virtually most recently or on site before that. So I suppose often people think, okay, well, I've done this stuff. I've put in like a lovely employee assistance program where people can get, you know, six sessions of counselling if they ring up or they do this and that. But no one takes it up, and so I'm paying for something that no one's using. And I think there's a couple of different things there. One is simple awareness. So are you communicating that you've done these things? Sometimes, you know, saying, oh yes, of course, we put it in the induction pack. Well, the induction pack is what, 40 pages long. You might not notice that you can, you know, 2 years later know that you can get some counselling because something's going on with you. So keeping that awareness up is really important from a really basic point of view. But if it's more fundamental than that, sometimes it's around having enough dialogue between employees and employers to know what you're putting in place is relevant and useful to them. Because we can all have incredibly good intentions. You can say, I really want to improve the well-being of my staff. I'm a runner, so I shall make running shoes, you know, discounted at the local shop, and I'll give them everyone an hour to go running at lunchtime, which might suit, you know, 1% of people in your organisation, but perhaps not the others. So if you're listening to people and saying, what could I do best, what would best help you, it might be something as simple as, in the old days, it was as simple as get a better printer, so that we're not constantly having this problem, or sort out my earphones, things that are really basic to people's working lives that annoy them, and getting rid of them. Well-being, like I said, is not just about wellness and health, it's about the whole rounded experience of being able to do your work.
Okay. Another question is about, I guess it's tagged on to hybrid working, about, and you mentioned, everyone's mentioned it, about the work-life balance. And I think, Helen, you made an excellent point about having that boundary very clear. I think that's really important. But some people have got used to working from home and actually don't want to go back to the office. Now, how does a business manage that fairly, with it in line with its policy, but also without the risk of losing, which we've been touching upon today, is sometimes excellent talent, new, existing talent. Some people might, new talent that you want to recruit, say, I don't want to work in the office, I want to work from home. But by the way, I'm very good, and you'll regret it if you don't recruit me type of attitude. How does a business deal with that fairly? Is it just about creating flexible policy from a human resources point of view?
I mean, from my point of view, it's about having that an eye both on consistency and fairness at both times. So the consistency element is this policy is open to all. We haven't just made an exception for you because you're a super duper person who will do this thing, and you've persuaded us this. If it's open to someone to say, I would like to do this, and I've given you a business case, why shouldn't that be open to someone else? And if there isn't a business case why they should be able to do it, that they can provide their work exactly the same quality as if someone else, if they did it in the office, why wouldn't you listen to something that has that business case but benefits them and keeps them in your organization? The only thing to notice there, I mentioned the inequalities because those have really been exacerbated by the pandemic situation, that especially around gender, if when forced into a lockdown condition, women were doing more of the childcare, there's homeschooling, the housework, the maintenance of the home around their work, and so they may not, because of the position they're being forced into, either feel they can or ask about certain opportunities that maybe someone else might ask about. So it's always having that eye to, okay, so yes, I'm going to consider the things that people are requesting for me, but I'm also going to consider who's not requesting that from me and what barrier might be in their way. So those two things, consistency and fairness, are really important to balance.
Maybe another question for you, Becky, in terms of, I mean, in fact, for Becky and for Lexi, indeed, because, it's been a very, very difficult period during the last 18 months, 2 years. But are there any positives that you would like that have come out of it that actually you would not have expected to come out of it? And from a business perspective, and also from for example, a trainee's perspective, and Lexi, for you, I mean, what are the positives that have come out of this incredible experience that we've all had to endure for the last 18 months or so? Becky, maybe first. Oh, Lexi, go on.
Oh no, I don't mind. Like, Becky, you
Go
go
on,
first.
you go.
To me, to you. No, I think the biggest thing is the flexibility with our study options. So the fact that we now have the option, we can do it remotely, and also the ICAW have been really good about giving us the option to take our exams remotely. So if you can't get to an exam centre, because it used to be a case of either you get yourself to the exam centre or you don't take the exam, whereas now there is the option to do it remotely if you don't feel comfortable or you can't get there, which opens up more possibility and more opportunities for people to complete their qualifications. Me personally, I prefer being in an exam centre because you get into the right mindset, but that's just me personally. But it's definitely given that option, and if for whatever reason we need to go back into lockdown, it won't hinder our training program. Like, we know that we will continue to progress through and complete our qualification. It won't delay, so our 3-year qualification won't turn into a 5-year qualification.
Right, good. Okay.
Yeah, I think certainly our training organisations have learnt very swiftly how to deal with this, and whilst Lexi's exams June last year were postponed, weren't they, until September, because they didn't have the facilities to take those exams other than at an exam centre. Now we're in a much better place, and as Lexi says, that opens up opportunities for more people to take that qualification. In terms of the business, there have been positives. You know, for starters, the team have shown absolutely what they can do in really challenging times, and it's brought out different aspects of people. We've accelerated our understanding of what we can do with tech and also working flexibly. You know, we always could work remotely if we wanted to, if there was a business case for doing so. And I think some people frowned upon it as to why would someone do that, and now we've all been forced into the situation for a period of time, and those people have completely changed their views and can see how it can work. So I think it's opened up different ways of working, different ways of communicating, and we've come on so much. You know, they say how much we've advanced in terms of technology, don't they, in that 18-month period. But I think we also need to remember the fundamentals and exactly what Helen's saying about communication, making sure people feel part of something, and just making sure that they understand the purpose as well of their role, their responsibility, and also the direction that the business is going, so that they can feel that they've got a part in that. And when it comes to where they do their work, we absolutely say, yeah, just because people can do their work remotely doesn't mean that they should all the time, because of the roles and responsibilities we all have to develop each other. And you know, we're a people organisation ultimately, so we're certainly, you know, we're open to any model in terms of working, but we always come back to, can you fulfil your roles and responsibilities both to our clients and to our people, your wider team, and also to your own development. You know, things like Helen was saying about people used to, the nurses having their CPD training day, that's something that we certainly are conscious that we need to allow time for training, because if it's not attending something physically, it does slip because we're so busy. So it's really important to make sure we keep all of these things in check, really.
Yeah, it just says recruitment can be particularly difficult in East Anglia and is currently very competitive. Does the panel have any thoughts on how we can try and ensure we retain good people when, for example, they may have their heads turned by 100% more remote working for competitors? So basically, we've touched upon that, but I guess this is the challenge that everyone's going to face. Again, Becky, you touched upon it earlier when you said, well, there's a good thing about it, but there's equally there's a threat as an opportunity there, but there's also a threat to it in the sense that other people, so for example, a firm in London might recruit somebody in East Anglia and say to them, well, look, guys, you can work from home.
Absolutely.
So
and vice versa, you know, someone in Norfolk could work for a firm in London, earning a London salary and not incur the travel costs, the time, etc., can stay working in Norfolk. So we completely understand it. It's both an opportunity and a threat. I think it comes back to exactly what Helen was saying about the wider piece, about why would someone want to work for you and be part of your business, and understanding the purpose, the vision, the goals of that business and how they fit into that and what the opportunities are for them there. And I think that's a much bigger piece, because you know, if people are happy and satisfied in their current role, then something else won't turn their head quite as swiftly. And I absolutely get, you know, there's going to be offers out there which can't be ignored. But we need to have made sure we've got all of that stuff in place in terms of that employee value proposition, and our people understand what that is, and we're constantly communicating with them and making it as attractive as we possibly can, understanding what their wants and needs are, as Helen said. So being flexible in our packages, you know, not dictating what we think they want, asking them, engaging with them.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps if it's allowed, I might say something here, because if I put on my chair of the financial industry group hat, I mean, the financial industry group, Argav, is all about having a thriving financial and professional services cluster in Norwich and Norfolk. And the reason I say that is because sometimes we undersell how much value there is, and again, value in inverted commas, I suppose, to living and working in Norwich. And anyone, you know, I think that I would suggest that the Norfolk pound can probably stretch a little bit further than, say, the London pound. But actually, not only that, you live in a place that's fantastic to live in and work in. And I'm not quite sure the economic strategy of the area often sells that enough. And I think it should try and sell it more. And in fact, I would view this as an opportunity to attract, especially hybrid working is a huge opportunity for Norwich and Norfolk to attract people to the area who want a different lifestyle, but but can have a more, they don't have to go commuting every day. So I think that this is something that maybe needs to be worked upon. I mean, I've just tried to summarize it in the way I've just summarized it, but I do believe that there's something there for the local enterprise partnership in New Anglia to build upon. I would suggest. I don't know if anyone's got any observations, or if you agree, or please feel free to disagree if you think I'm not correct there. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree about the sort of we need making people aware of how lovely it is to live around here. I wonder if the question was focused on the sort of idea of competition and what's going to be going on. And I know I addressed that before in talking about kind of building reputation and getting people to talk about what you're doing well. But I suppose the other thing to think about is what's going to happen going forwards will resolve itself with lots of jobs are being advertised as flexible at the moment, but in the office at some unknown point in the future. So in that sense, a lot of the time, things aren't quite as clear cut as, oh, everyone will be working remotely so they can live in lovely Norwich but gain London wages. I think it is still an issue in flux. We're going to have to wait and see how this one falls out, because I think some businesses will start to say, now come back to London, and you'll end up in a job where you thought you were remote working, and now you're going up 3 times a week. And I've done that before, and it's not great. So always being aware that we're in an evolving situation, and I'm not sure we're going to, beyond working on your workplace well-being, working on your reputation, I'm not sure we're going to get beyond those things until we know how it's falling out with regard to people going back to the office and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I do think it's a challenge we need to face very soon in this area. I'm just very conscious of the fact we're running up against the time now. The next slide. Yeah, thanks. I just want to thank very much the panelists in particular. I mean, warm thanks to all of you today for spending. This was a bit of an experiment, and hopefully I hope it's worked okay for you. And thanks for the time Becky, Helen and Lexi spending with us, because I'm sure you've probably got lots of other things that you can do as well today, but it's been very good. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank everyone who's helped with today's seminar. So thanks, Lizzie. It's been thanks for your help there, and the team that's behind you. And thanks to everybody who's attended the session today. I hope you found it useful. As I say earlier on, we'll try and get this on the website at some point, and for those of you who've missed it, and I would like to thank you all for attending. On contacts, we've put up there, you can see the FIG Norwich contact points, the UEA contact point, which is Anna Douglas, who a lot of you already know, and also the Larking Gowen website, which is very good, and it's got some good reference material on it from really from the start of COVID, actually, and with some good videos on there of partners saying what they think you should be doing, etc. at that time, but it's moved on since then. So I would encourage you to have a look at those as well. Finally, just really thanks again, and take this opportunity to wish you all a great holiday in the next few weeks, and also hope to see you again in person, hopefully in 2022, rather than virtually. I thought we were nearly there, but there you go. We've still got a little bit of time to go where we might have some more restrictions, but hopefully this has worked for you. And thanks to everybody for attending. So,
thank
Thank
you.
you.
thanks everybody, and so I'll bring it to a close now. Thanks. Bye.